Would you like a jelly baby? Doctor Who and the Seeds of Doom by Philip Hinchcliffe. Chapter 1, Mystery Under the Ice. Everywhere, as far as the eye could see, was a gleaming expanse of white. Moberly adjusted his goggles to counteract the glare and brushed the tiny icicles from his beard. The temperature was dropping fast, and judging from the cloud formation above the distant hills, a blizzard was brewing. 2 years in the Antarctic had taught him to pay attention to such signs. He pulled his parka tightly around his face and called to another muffled figure crouched in a deep trench nearby. "Come on, Charles. The weather's turning. We've got enough samples for testing." The other man seemed not to hear him. He was hacking furiously at something in the trench with his ice pick. Moberly dropped down beside him. "Look," said his companion. He pointed at a dark, gourd-like object about the size of a pineapple embedded in the icy wall. "What is it?" asked Moberly, his eyes widening in amazement. "Dunno, but it's not ice," said the man named Charles. And he carefully prized the object free. "Bit of a mystery, eh?" Moberly nodded. "Let's get it back to camp and take a proper look." He took the strange object from Charles and climbed out of the trench. It felt curiously heavy considering its size. He placed it on the sledge and teamed up the dogs for the trek back to camp. Charles joined him a moment later, and the two men set off across the icy waste, the dogs barking excitedly. A sudden squall of snow blew across the sledge as it gathered speed, and the wind began to howl in the distance. Moberly shivered. Without knowing why, he felt uneasy, as if the approaching blizzard carried with it a sense of impending doom. The bright yellow huts, which formed Antarctica Camp 3, sat huddled in the snow at the foot of a low ridge of mountains. The huts were linked by corrugated steel tunnels, which gleamed like new whenever the sun shone. Wow! Now, however, the air was dark with snow as the blizzard swept down from the mountains. Moberly and his companion, Charles Winlet, had been lucky to reach camp in time. Inside the huts, the contrast was astonishing. The specially insulated walls and ceiling kept the atmosphere at an even temperature, and the overall impression was one of warmth and light. In the laboratory, John Stevenson, the expedition's chief botanist, was carefully freeing hardened ice from the outer surface of the pod-like object. He was a pleasant, chubby man of about 45, with a gingery mustache and thinning hair. In his white lab coat, he had the air of a kindly dentist as he probed the pod with a metal spatula. He stopped and turned as Winlet and Moberly entered. They had removed their outer furs and were now dressed in jeans and sweaters. Derek Moberly was a large man with a big bushy beard and a serious expression. He was a zoologist and the most recent arrival on the polar expedition, which had been in the field now for 3 years. Charles Winlet, a geologist, was smaller and neater with a trim beard and pale blue eyes which twinkled with good humor. Both men were in their early 30s. Moberly crossed the pod. "Animal, vegetable, or mineral, John?" he asked. "Vegetable," replied Stevenson without hesitation. "This cutaneous creasing is unmistakable. When it's properly thawed, I can confirm it with the cytology test." He gave the pod another poke with his spatula. The ice was already melting in places to reveal a hard green casing. Stevenson stared at it, puzzled. "How deep in the permafrost was it?" he asked, in poor English. "I guess about the 9th layer," replied Winlet, also in poor English. "Which means it's been there at least 20,000 years. Oh, poor English accent. There was a moment's silence as the significance of this remark sank in. All three men were experts in their field, but none of them had come up against anything like this before. The pod sat still and silent, glowing strangely in the rays of the ultraviolet lamp being used to thaw it out. "Well, it looks tropical to me, like a gourd," ventured Moberly. Rubbish, Derek, said Winlet. If it's the late Pleistocene... Rubbish, Derek, said Winlet. If it's the late Pleistocene period, it can't be tropical. It's a few million years since this part of the Antarctica was rainforest. That's the accepted theory, said Moberly. Discoveries like this have destroyed... What accent is... He's not Australian. That's the accepted theory, said Moberly. Discoveries like this have destroyed accepted theories before. Isn't that right, John? Stevenson did not reply. He was staring fixedly at the pod, as if in a trance. Something wrong? Asked Moberly, and he suddenly remembered the feeling of unease that came over him when he first handled the pod himself. Stevenson rubbed his head. Don't you feel it? He said slowly. There was a hint of fear in his voice. Feel what? Said Winlet. Something odd. Strange. As if... Stevenson struggled for the words. As if there's some kind of other presence in the room. Winlet laughed. You're imagining things, John. Must be that rice pudding you had for lunch. Stevenson did not smile. I'm not joking. He crouched over the pod, as if mesmerized by it. Winlet and Moberly exchanged glances. They had never seen Stevenson like this before. They had never seen Stevenson like this before. He was usually cool and level-headed, not given to wild imaginings. What had gotten into him? Suddenly, Stevenson gave a cry and backed away from the pod. I know what's wrong. His voice dropped to whisper. It's alive. That thing is still alive. He began pushing the others toward the door. Wait a minute, said Winlet. How can you tell? I don't know how, but I'm certain it's a living organism. Stevenson spoke with total conviction. I'm going to transmit pictures to London. Come on. He strode out of the room. Winlet shrugged his shoulders and followed. Moberly remained at the door a moment, an anxious look on his face. Although he didn't like to admit it, he too found the pod worrying and somehow frightening. He glanced across at it. It lay there on the bench, silent and sinister, an unwelcome guest from Earth's deep and hidden past. By 2 o'clock that same day, pictures of the pod, received direct by satellite from Antarctica, had succeeded in mystifying every botanical expert in England. Sir Colin Thackeray, head of the World Ecology Bureau, was beginning to think he was the victim of some gigantic hoax. In desperation, he had finally told his deputy, Dunbar, to get on to a chap called the Doctor, who worked for UNIT.
United Nations Intelligence Task Force.
Bit of a long shot, Sir Colin had said, but worth a try in the circumstances. It was understandable why Dunbar adopted a skeptical, even sarcastic attitude to the particular personage who invaded his office later that afternoon. Wearing a long red velvet coat, a broad-brimmed hat, and a large multicolored scarf trailed over his shoulder, the doctor hardly looked the picture of scientific eminence. Dunbar wondered if, in fact, this was the man Sir Colin had meant, or whether there had been some sort of mistake. He took the photographs of the pod from the filing cabinet. I doubt very much if you can help us, Sir Doctor, he began frostily. These pictures have baffled all the experts. The only reasonable explanation seems to be that the pod comes from some extinct species of plant. The doctor sprawled into a chair, dumped his feet on Dunbar's desk, and beamed a large, friendly smile. It is the sign of a tidy mind to look for reasonable explanations, Mr. Dunbar. The universe is full of unreasonable things, only capable of being explained unreasonably. Dunbar looked uncomfortable at this challenge to the normal processes of thought. Consider, for a moment, continued the doctor, the alternative hypothesis. He waved his arm airily. Such as, snapped Dunbar, beginning to feel irritated, that the pod may have originated in outer space. The doctor smiled sweetly, as if no one but a fool could possibly think otherwise. Dunbar angrily thrust the photographs at the doctor. If you've ever seen anything like this, you must have a very powerful telescope, he said tartly. The doctor pushed back the brim of his hat and studied the photographs. For the first time, Dunbar noticed how blue and penetrating the doctor's eyes were, and he could not help feeling he was in the presence of a very strange and powerful person. So strange he seemed not quite human. An alien! The doctor tossed the photos back on the desk. Mr. Dunbar,
How long is it since there was vegetation in Antarctica?
Dunbar explained this was something the World Ecology Expedition was trying to establish. The pod had been found deep in the permafrost, 20 or 30,000 years under the ice.
Yes, and it's probably still ticking,
interrupted the doctor. He leapt out of his chair and headed for the door.
What? I don't understand.
The doctor stabbed the air with his forefinger.
A time bomb, Mr. Dunbar. A time bomb. Are you in touch with the expedition?
Dunbar nodded.
A daily video link. Good. Tell them to keep a constant guard on this pod, but not to touch it under any circumstances until I arrive. You're going out there? Asked Dunbar, overcome by the sudden turn of events.
The doctor bobbed his head back in.
Just as soon as I've picked up my assistant and a toothbrush. And remember, no one must touch that pod.
Before Dunbar could reply again, the doctor had disappeared like a vanishing rabbit in a conjuring trick. Dunbar shook his head in disbelief. The last few minutes had been so unlike the ordered calm which usually prevailed in his office that he was half inclined to doubt whether the preceding interview had really taken place at all. Finally, he crossed to his desk and dialed a number on the intercom.
Sir Colin, Dunbar here, he said. That chap you called in from unit? Is he quite sane?
It was the middle of the night at Antarctica Camp 3. The blizzard had begun to subside, but the wind still whined around the huts. Winlet was sitting in the laboratory near the pod, dozing. The room was in darkness, save for the eerie glow of the ultraviolet lamp. A half-empty mug of cocoa stood on the bench where Winlet had left it before falling asleep. Now he was slumped awkwardly in his chair a few feet away. Earlier that day, Stevenson had measured the pod and found, to everyone's amazement, they had grown 5 centimeters in circumference. He had immediately ordered a round-the-clock vigil to monitor its progress. Winlet knew that such growth defied all normal biological laws. The pod had no root system to feed with, and no nitrogen intake. It was odd and disturbing. He had wondered whether Stevenson was right to continue the ultraviolet radiation in view of the warning from London. But Stevenson had brushed these fears aside. A distant door banged shut with the wind, and Winlet stirred. Still half asleep, he shifted his position in the chair, bringing an arm to rest on the bench not far from the pod. Then he dozed off again. Suddenly, with no sound whatsoever, the pod began to vibrate, and tiny cracks appeared in the outer casing. It was opening! Winlet remained asleep and unaware. From the top of the pod emerged a green tendril, like the shoot of some exotic plant. It reared several feet in the air, then slowly turned its head like a deadly snake seeking its victim. Seconds later, it sensed the presence of another living creature in the room. Gradually, the tendril crept toward Winlet. Then, in one quick motion, it engulfed his arm. Winlet jerked awake with a cry of pain. In blind panic, he reeled across the room, clutching his arm. The tendril had detached itself from the pod and was clinging to him. "John! Derek!" he shouted desperately, but a strange, cold sensation was already rushing through his body. He felt weak, his knees crumpled, and a terrible darkness descended in his brain. Chapter 2. Death Stalks the Camp. After his interview with the doctor, Dunbar did not go straight home. Instead, he drove 30 miles out of London, taking particular care he was not followed, to pay a visit on someone very special.
Mr. Richard Dunbar, sir, the World Ecology Bureau.
The butler threw open a pair of metal-studded doors, and Dunbar entered the room. Room was hardly the word to describe the place he now found himself in. Dunbar literally gasped with shock at the sight. For all around him, on each side, were nothing but plants. Plants of every description. Creepers, suckers, lichen, fungi, giant rubber plants, monstrous cacti, rare tropical blossoms, trailing vines, bamboo. The room was a living jungle, a Sargasso sea of waving green. Dunbar guessed it must be at least 50 yards long, although the farthest walls were invisible. High above, he could just make out a vaulted ceiling through the thick foliage. A raised iron walkway ran down the center of the room, and at the far end a man was spraying an exotic-looking flower with loving care. He was dressed immaculately in a dark Seville rose suit, and his hands were covered by elegant black leather gloves. The man turned as the butler made his announcement and glided down the catwalk toward Dunbar. He stopped and stared, without speaking. His eyes were extraordinarily large, like those of a predatory cat.
Mr. Chase, said Dunbar. Mr. Harrison Chase. The man nodded. There was something menacing about him. Lean and panther-like, he had the unmistakable stamp of power. A man not to be trifled with. A man who would stop at nothing to get his own way. He spoke. And what is your bureau doing about bonsai? Bonsai? Mutilation and torture, Mr. Dunbar. The hideous Japanese practice of miniaturizing shrubs and trees. We try to conserve all animal and plant life, replied Dunbar hurriedly. I'm glad to hear it. The cat's eyes flashed dangerously. I consider it my mission in life to protect the plant life of Mother Earth, and she needs a protector, does she not? Dunbar agreed. He knew of this man's obsession with plants, knew too that he was a millionaire many times over, with a considerable private army in his employ. It was wiser to agree than disagree with such a man. He fumbled with his briefcase and took out a large buff envelope. I have come to show you something. Mr. Chase, something discovered by one of our expeditions. He undid the envelope and handed over the photographs. A mysterious, unidentified pod. Chase examined the photographs. Very interesting. Where was it found? Dunbar hesitated. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment he would gamble not only his career, but, if the rumors about Chase were true, perhaps even his life. In the Antarctic. Under our control, he replied finally. But of course, in our violent and uncertain world, Mr. Chase, anything can happen. He paused. Such a valuable specimen could easily disappear. For a price. He looked hesitantly into the dark, feline eyes. I want the precise location.
I'm reading here.
He looked hesitantly into the dark, feline eyes. I want the precise location. Dunbar reached into his case again. A map and all the information you require. Chase smiled. Such forethought, Mr. Dunbar. An excellent attribute, and one for which you will be well rewarded. He clapped his hands. Hargreaves, call Scorby in here, and show Mr. Dunbar out. The butler bowed wordlessly, and ushered Dunbar into the corridor. The audience was over. Alone, Chase stared hungrily at the photographs once more. Unique, the only plant of its kind in the world, he whispered. Composite Harrison Chase. Yes, I must have it. I must! The cat-like eyes gleamed bright and manic. A noise at the door broke the spell. You wanted me, Mr. Chase? The speaker was a tall, swarthy man with a pointed black beard. Yes, Scorby, I'm sending you on a little errand. You'd better take Keela with you. Oh, and wrap up well. It could be snowing. Sarah Jane Smith had never felt so cold in her life. She was already regretting this mad trip to Antarctica. After 2 years as a doctor's special assistant, she should have known better, she told herself. She drew the hood of her parka tight and glanced across at the doctor. He remained impassive, staring out at the helicopter window. He was being unusually secretive about their mission. A sure sign he was worried, decided Sarah. Suddenly, the pilot yelled above the engine noise. There she is! The helicopter began to turn and drop. Beneath them, Sarah could just make out a huddle of bright yellow huts. So this was Antarctica Camp 3, not exactly the center of civilization. They landed and Sarah leapt out after the doctor. The big blades swirled dangerously overhead, creating a miniature snowstorm. A figure ran out from one of the huts to greet them. Welcome to the loneliest spot on Earth. You must be the doctor. We were expecting someone a lot older. The doctor smiled. I'm only 749. I used to be even younger. The man grinned, not knowing how to take this remark. He turned to Sarah and extended a hand. Derek Moberly. How do you do? Sarah Jane Smith, the young doctor's assistant. She laughed. Tell me, is the weather always like this? I feel like I've got frostbite already. Moberly chuckled. No, sometimes it gets quite warm. 10 degrees below freezing. He eyed the doctor's red velvet frock coat. Are you all right dressed like that? I haven't traveled 10,000 miles to discuss the weather, snapped the doctor. Shall we get started? A few minutes later, he stood next to Stevenson in the sick bay, gazing down at the motionless form of Winland. He hasn't spoken a word since last night, explained Stevenson anxiously. We heard a cry, came in and found him on the laboratory floor. The pod was open.
The doctor glanced at the progress chart and raised an eyebrow in surprise.
According to these figures, he should be dead. He pulled back the bedclothes.
Stevenson gasped in horror.
Good grief! What is it?
Winlet's right hand had suddenly vanished, and in its place was a green, vegetable-like growth.
Whatever came out of that pod has obviously infected him, replied the doctor grimly. How soon can you get a proper medical team here?
Stevenson tugged at his mustache.
We've been on to them, but conditions are bad. Maybe tomorrow?
The doctor straightened the bedclothes and stepped back.
I doubt if tomorrow is going to be soon enough. Show me the pod.
Stevenson led him out of the sickbay and down a narrow, corrugated steel tunnel to a door marked laboratory. Inside, Sarah and Moberly were huddled over a crackling radio set.
What is it? Asked Stevenson. Bad news, said Moberly gravely. The medical team has turned back. One of the snowcats fell into a crevasse.
Stevenson began to panic.
What are we going to do? Winlet's dying. No, he's not, said the doctor. He's changing form, which could be worse. We need a blood test, fast. I'm a zoologist. I can prepare a specimen slide, offered Moberly. The doctor nodded. Right.
Moberly hurried out, and the doctor turned to Stevenson.
The pod.
Stevenson led him to the bench where the pod had lain open and untouched since the attack on Winlet. The doctor stooped to examine it.
Why did it open, I wonder? He muttered to himself.
Stevenson shifted uneasily.
That could be my fault. I used the ultraviolet lamp to thaw it out. I felt certain there was life there, you see. The doctor rose and gave him a stony stare. Mr. Stevenson, he said slowly and deliberately, what you have done could result in the total destruction of life on this planet.
In the sickbay, Winlet was growing worse by the minute, as the green infection crept relentlessly up his arm. Meanwhile, the doctor had asked to see the trench where the pod had been found. For over an hour, he, Stevenson, and Sarah had battled through a howling gale to reach the spot. Now he was digging furiously in the icy wall with a small pick, oblivious to the biting wind and the thick snow which almost blotted the other two from view. Suddenly he stopped.
Yes, I thought so. Here we are.
He threw the pick aside and, scrabbling with his bare hands, lifted out of the ice his second pod, an exact replica of the first.
Another pod!
Gasped Sarah.
How did you know? Began Stevenson. Will there be any more? No, they always travel in pairs, like policemen.
The doctor stood up, clearly very pleased with himself. What are we going to do with it? Asked Sarah, puzzled.
Put it in the fridge. Come on.
The doctor scrambled out of the trench. The other two followed, none the wiser. It was almost nightfall by the time they regained camp. The doctor immediately placed the pod in a special freeze box in the lab, used for keeping ice samples. There was no further news on the medical team, but Moberly had taken the blood test. One look confirmed the doctor's suspicions. The platelets of Winlet's blood, magnified 1,000-fold, revealed the presence of plant bacteria.
As I thought, said the doctor, removing his eye from the microscope. A human being whose blood is turning into vegetable soup.
At that moment, the roar of an aircraft engine shook the walls of the crew quarters where they were standing.
The medical team! Cried Sarah jubilantly. Quick, Derek, the landing lights!
Yelled Stevenson, and the two of them grabbed their snowsuits and dashed outside. Sarah turned to the doctor. Will they be able to do anything for that man?
I don't know, Sarah. He's halfway toward becoming a crinoid.
Crinoid?
The doctor nodded.
You mean you recognize the pod?
Oh, yes, said the doctor. I was fairly certain when I saw the photographs in London, but now I'm sure.
Well, what is a crinoid? Demanded Sarah. Peeved he had not told her of his suspicions. What does it do?
You could describe it as a galactic weed, explained the doctor. The pod we found is just one of 1,000 seeds dispersed by the mother plant. Given the right conditions, each pod releases a parasitic shoot which attaches itself to the nearest animal life form. In this instance, it happened to be human. The infected victim changes rapidly and ultimately develops into a fully grown crinoid, thus completing the cycle.
Sarah gasped. Doctor, but that's terrifying. How did these pods manage to land here on Earth?
Good question, said the doctor, tapping the side of his nose. I wish I knew the answer. Possibly their planet of origin is very turbulent. Every so often there could be internal explosions which send surface matter shooting off into space. He paused, as if weighing up the pros and cons of the theory in his mind. The door burst open at this point, and Moberly and Stevenson struggled in, supporting two frozen, semi-collapsed figures. Is this the medical team? Asked the doctor. Afraid not, gasped Stevenson as he helped ease the two strangers gently into a couple of chairs. Just got themselves lost. Moberly administered some piping hot coffee from a flask, which the two men gratefully gulped down. Sorry to be such a nuisance, said one of them finally. We were running low on fuel when we saw your lights. He was tall and swarthy, with a black pointed beard. That was lucky, said Sarah. Lights are few and far between in Antarctica. The doctor's voice, urgent and decisive, cut through these explanations. The medical team was our last chance. Now we must act for ourselves. And quickly, he shot out of the room. Where's he going now? Oh my god, he's southern. Where's he going now? Asked Stevenson.
Where do you think? Replied Sarah. Come on. She hurried out, Stevenson and Moberly close behind her. Left alone, the two strangers exchanged wary glances.
Did you think they swallowed it? Said the second man. He was small and ferrety. Don't worry, Keela, said the dark one. What can they do? He tapped his left breast and grinned. The bulge of an automatic pistol could just be seen beneath his nylon snowsuit.
The doctor was already in the sick bay when Sarah and the others rushed in. They were totally unprepared for the sight which hit them. Winlet lay on the bed, deathly pale, his breath rasping and distorted. The plant-like infection now covered his entire right side. Stevenson fought for words. It's as if he's turning into some kind of monster.
That's exactly what is happening, said the doctor bravely. Can't we do anything to help? Yes, but it's drastic, warned the doctor. We can amputate the arm. It's his only chance. But none of us are surgeons, protested Moberly. It could be fatal. It's a risk we have to take, snapped the doctor. Come on. He led the way out. The door shut on the motionless form in the bed. For a few seconds, everything remained still as the footsteps receded up the corridor. Then, slowly, the figure of Winlet sat up, his head swiveled trance-like toward the door, and the glazed, lifeless eyes stared murderously out of their sockets. In the lab, the doctor was issuing orders. Sarah, we'll need hot water and towels. Stevenson, get more lights. Moberly, you have some medical training. You can perform the actual surgery. Moberly nodded and started to gather equipment and instruments onto a tray. The doctor glanced at the clock above the door. Every second was vital. Not only Winlet's life was at stake. Once the crinoid organism was allowed to take root in one person, it was merely a matter of time before the whole of humanity fell prey to the lethal weed. Moberly finished his preparations and made for the door. I'll take these to the sick bay and start setting up. Good man, said the doctor. Sarah glanced anxiously in his direction. Do you think there's a chance? There's always a chance, said the doctor quietly, but Sarah could tell he was worried. Moberly walked carefully down the tunnel. The doctor was right. They would need more lights. He hoped Stevenson could fix the transformer or something. He turned the corner near the sick bay. That was odd. The door was open. He crept forward the last few paces and peered in. The bed was empty. Charles? There was no reply. Charles? Where are you? Moberly stepped into the room and put down the tray. As he did so, something strange and cold, like a piece of wet seaweed, touched the back of his neck. He spun around. A hideous, semi-human shape lunged at his throat and started to throttle him. Gasping, Moberly stepped into the room and put down the tray. As he did so, something strange and cold, like a piece of wet seaweed, touched the back of his neck. He spun around. A hideous, semi-human shape lunged at his throat and started to throttle him. Gasping, Moberly sank to his knees. The pressure increased. He couldn't breathe. The room began to spin. Everything was going blurred. He could not escape from the suffocating grip. Then,
Nothing but blackness, rushing and overwhelming. Moberly fell to the floor, dead. The dark, monstrous shape rose from his body, glided like a phantom down the murky passage, and slipped into the howling, stormy night outside. Chapter 3. Hunt in the Snow. Carrying an armful of towels and fresh linen, Sarah made her way toward the sickbay. As she drew near, she suddenly felt a cold draught around her feet. Someone must have left an outside door open. She turned the corner and froze with horror. There, slumped in the shadows, lay the body of Moberly. One glance was enough to tell her the worst. She spun around. The door at the far end of the passage was banging on its hinges in the wind, and snow had started to drift in. She shut the door and hurried back to the lab. "Moberly's dead!" Sarah stood framed in the doorway, white as a ghost. "What?" cried Stevenson. The doctor threw aside the tray of bottles he was preparing and darted out. In 2 seconds, he was by the body. There was a faint green mark under his chin. "I found an outside door open," said Sarah. "Something must have come in."
"No, Sarah," said the doctor chillingly. "Something went out."
He entered the sickbay. The bed lay empty, and all around were clear signs the struggle had taken place. Stevenson shook his head.
"You don't mean Charles?" "Left after killing Moberly," finished the doctor. "Only he is no longer Charles. He is an alien." "An alien? I can't believe it," cried Stevenson in anguish. "I told you he's changing form. Already his mind has been taken over. Eventually his entire body will alter."
"Into a crinoid?"
said Sarah. The doctor nodded and turned to Stevenson. "Winlet, as you knew him, is already dead. For the sake of the rest of humanity, we must destroy what he had become." He spoke gently, but with finality. Stevenson lowered his eyes, believing but not wanting to accept this terrible truth. In the crew quarters, the stranger with the beard was methodically searching the room. He found a rifle under one of the bunks and began to dismantle it. "What are you doing, Scorby?" "I've given up on the accent." His companion spoke nervously. "I don't like guns in the wrong hands." Scorby tampered with the firing pin for a few minutes and, satisfied the mechanism was sabotaged, placed the rifle carefully under the bunk. "I wish you'd stop acting like some creep gangster. We've only come here to confirm the pod is something unusual." Scorby grinned. "You don't think we're going to fly back empty-handed, do you, Keeler?" The small man looked genuinely surprised. "It's the first you've mentioned. What are you planning?" Scorby gave a nasty leer. "Tomorrow we dig a nice big hole in the snow, big enough for, say, 5 bodies. Then we fill the hole, take the pod, and go home. No witnesses, nothing. Just another lost expedition." Keeler recoiled in disgust. "You're mad! I won't do that!" "You'll do exactly as you're told." Scorby tapped his pistol threateningly. "Or else, I'll just make that hole a little bit bigger." Keeler backed away and nearly collided with the doctor as he came hurtling in, followed by Sarah and Stevenson. "Come on, we don't have much time." The doctor sounded impatient. Sarah and Stevenson hurriedly donned their snowsuits. "What's the trouble?" asked Scorby, quickly regaining his composure. "We're going out." "In this weather?" "Yes, in this weather," snapped the doctor. Stevenson crossed to his bunk and took out the rifle. "Ready." The doctor eyed the weapon. "I hope that's the answer," he said quietly, and led the way out. Keeler turned anxiously on Scorby as the door slammed. "What the devil's going on?" "I don't know. They're not going to build a snowman, that's for sure." He stepped over to the door. "Come on, now's our chance." "What do you mean?" "To find the pod." He opened the door gently and, checking the corridor was clear, beckoned Keeler to follow. Outside, it was very dark, and a heavy snow was falling. Sarah noticed that, although they had only traveled a few hundred yards, the lights of the camp behind them were no longer visible. She shivered. The cold was already unbearable, and constant flurries of snow prevented her from seeing more than a few feet ahead. She stumbled on behind the doctor. He seemed oblivious to the conditions, pausing only once in a while to secure his hat. All the time he was scanning the endless expanse of snow. "No sign of any tracks!" yelled Sarah. Stevenson shook his head. "The wind covers everything in a matter of minutes." Suddenly the doctor pointed. "What's that over there?" They had reached a high ridge, and he was gazing at something below.
Stevenson peered into the gloom.
That's our power unit.
A small metal building lay half buried in the snow, several hundred yards distant. Only the doctor's superhuman eyesight could have picked it out from such a range.
Why is it so far from the camp? He shouted. Safety measure. It's a new fuel cell system, being tested out here for the first time. Let's take a look.
They scrambled down the ice-covered slope and approached the power unit. The snow seemed undisturbed. Why, this door can't have been opened for weeks, remarked Sarah. It's iced solid.
It's as well to be sure, said the doctor, and he started to yank it open. He'd try to find shelter in this weather.
Stevenson slipped the safety catch on his rifle. After a couple of hefty pulls from the doctor, the ice cracked away and 3 of them stepped inside. The walls and floor of the power unit were bare, but in the center stood a large, complicated structure about 10 feet across, giving out a soft glow of heat. This was the experimental fuel cell. 1 or 2 large pipes and cables ran off the walls and then underground to the rest of the camp to supply the power and electricity needed. There was very little scope for concealment. No cactus spines or puddles of snow, said Sarah. Doesn't look like he's been here.
Is there anywhere else he could hide? The doctor asked Stevenson. Not outside the camp itself.
He wouldn't last long, would he? Outside?
Ventured Sarah. Not without special clothing, replied Stevenson. No, I'm afraid Charles must have collapsed somewhere. You keep forgetting, Stevenson. He isn't a man anymore, not of flesh and blood.
Well, if he's a plant doctor, or a vegetable, whatever he is, he'd have even less resistance to cold, wouldn't he? Argued Sarah.
Perhaps. On the other hand, the crinoid might come from a planet where this would be considered glorious summer. Stevenson frowned. You know, I still find this hard to take. You're trying to tell me these things are an alien plant species and lethal to all human and animal life. But how do you know? Never mind how I know. It's fact. On every planet where the crinoid gets established, all animal life is extinguished. What happened to your friend Moberly should convince you.
Sarah could see the doctor was irritated by Stevenson. She tried to sound reassuring. But there's no real danger now, is there? One pod is safely in the freezer and...
She was about to say windlet, but checked herself.
And the other is probably frozen stiff under the snow.
The doctor crossed the door. I hope you're right, Sarah, he said as he led them out. The 3 figures emerging from the power unit were unaware of a hideous form crouched behind a snowbank, less than 20 feet away. Its cold, inhuman eyes followed the doctor's movements as he bolted the door from the inside. Then, as the trio climbed back up the ridge and out of sight, the creature, half human, half plant, crept from hiding and crawled across the snow toward the building. With one swift movement, it prized open the door and entered. Inside, it let out a low, rattling noise and settled beside the fuel cell, sucking in the warmth. In the laboratory, Scorby and Keeler were conducting a methodical search. You're supposed to be the botanist, Keeler. Where would you keep this pod? It must be here somewhere. Keeler looked around in desperation. Scorby picked up an intricate piece of measuring equipment and held it aloft. Careful, warned his companion. That's valuable. Scorby grinned, then smashed it violently onto the floor. So what? He sneered. There'll be nobody here to use it after we leave. Suddenly the radio sprang to life. Hello, hello. This is South Bend calling Camp 3. Come in, Camp 3. Over. Scorby darted a look at Keeler, then crossed the radio. He pressed a switch. Camp 3 receiving you. Over. Is that you, Derek? Said the voice, distorted by static. Scorby hesitated. Yes. Go ahead, South Bend. The voice continued. The weather's clearing this end. The medical team will be with you as soon as possible. Have they left yet? Asked Scorby, concealing his alarm. They're leaving right now. Cancel them, ordered Scorby. We don't need help. Everything's under control. There was silence for a moment. Then the voice spoke again, this time inquisitive and suspicious. Hello? Is that you, Derek? Smiling, Scorby clicked off the radio and began smashing the circuits with the butt of his gun. Taylor looked up in alarm. What are you doing? Fixing it, grinned Scorby. Didn't anyone ever tell you silence is golden? But shut up, Keeler, and find that pod. The small man winced as his partner savagely dismembered the radio equipment. A few moments later, however, Keeler let out an excited yell as he moved a tray from under the bench. On it lay the 2 empty halves of the first pod. Look! It's the pod in Dunbar's photograph! He fitted the 2 halves together. Some idiots cut it open, hissed Scorby. Keeler shook his head. No, it wasn't cut. It must have germinated. What's that? The pod has opened as part of its natural cycle to release a shoot or something. Scorby digested this unexpected piece of information. But it's the actual plant that Harrison Chase wants, right? Right. Then what have they done with it, Keeler? He paced the room nervously. We've got to find it or Chase will skin us alive. If you hadn't smashed the radio, perhaps we could have asked South Bend. Scorby gave Keeler a scornful look. Are you trying to be funny? The discovery of this pod has been kept secret. Only the top brass of the Ecology Bureau know about it. And Harrison Chase, corrected Keeler. That bloke on the radio said medical aid was coming. Medical aid for who? There must be someone here who's ill. A malevolent smile settled on his dark features. And he'll tell us where this thing is, I promise you. Gun in hand, Scorby led the way out of the lab and down the passage. It ran to an intersection. Which way? Whispered Keeler. Scorby paused, then headed to his left. On the floor of the far end of the tunnel was a towel dropped earlier by Sarah in her haste. The 2 men turned the corner. Opposite was a door marked Sick Bay. Scorby smiled and pushed open the door. His expression immediately turned to shock as he caught sight of a body on the bed, hurriedly draped in a sheet. Is he dead? Gasped Keeler. Scorby pulled back the sheet. Stiff as a board. Look! What's that? Keeler's finger pointed to the green mark on Moberly's throat. Dunno, but it's not measles. Scorby twitched the sheet back. And you won't be telling us anything either. At that moment, they both heard a noise in the corridor outside. Footsteps and voices were approaching. Scorby signaled Keeler to go behind the door and quickly positioned himself at the other side. It sounded like the doctor and that girl. They were bound to notice the open door. Scorby's finger tightened on the trigger of his gun. The doctor paused outside the sickbay, puzzled. Something was wrong. He motioned to Sarah to keep quiet. Why was the door open? His mind raced through the events of the last few hours like a computer. The 2 strangers, of course! Their landing here was too much of a coincidence. They had come with a purpose, and that could mean only one thing. The doctor sprang into the room, and Scorby's pistol dug coldly into his neck. Chapter 4. Sabotage. Put your hands up, Doctor! The doctor obeyed. And you! Sarah was yanked into the room and forced to follow suit. The doctor eyed the gun. Have we annoyed you in some way? Food not to your liking? Shut up! Commanded Scorby viciously. Okay, now start talking. Make up your mind, smiled the doctor. I said talk. Certainly. Did you know that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had perfect pitch? Sarah could see Scorby was not amused. What happened to him? He hissed, jerking his head toward the bed. Wolfgang Amadeus? The doctor feigned puzzlement. Oh, him! Suddenly serious. He died. We gathered that. What did it? Asked Keeler. The doctor did not answer. It's something to do with that pod, isn't it? What's happened to the pod? What pod? The pistol dug deeper into the doctor's neck. There's already 1 corpse in here, Doctor. I can easily double that number. Sarah glanced anxiously at the doctor out of the corner of her eye. She felt certain Scorby meant what he said. Finally, the doctor spoke. There's been an accident. One of the men here has been infected. By the pod? Exclaimed Keeler. He went mad, said Sarah quietly. Yes, added the doctor. You could say he's not quite himself anymore. Where is he now? We don't know, answered Sarah. Somewhere out there. Keeler glanced around nervously. You mean you have a homicidal maniac on the loose? More dangerous than that, I'm afraid, replied the doctor. If he, or rather it, is still alive, then it will be desperate to reach food and warmth, and there's only one place he can find those things. He weighed his words carefully and looked for their effect on the 2 strangers. You mean this camp? Yes, comforting thought, isn't it? Said the doctor airily. I advise you to keep all doors and windows locked. That is, if you're planning to stay." He smiled sweetly, like a benevolent hotel proprietor. Keeler looked anxiously at his partner. "What are we going to do?" Sarah could see the other man was not convinced. "I want some more answers, but not in here." Scorby nodded toward the bed. "He gives me the creeps. Come on, you two. Move!" He prodded the doctor and Sarah out of the sick bay and into the corridor. In the power unit, the creature was growing stronger by the minute, bathed by the warm glow from the fuel cell. All vestige of humanity had long since disappeared, and it was now a mass of tendrils and fibrous shoots, like some giant, malformed plant. But a plant that could move and crush and kill. Suddenly, it began to stir. From where the green growth was thickest, there came a strange, low, rattling sound. Then the whole monstrous shape started to creep toward the door. The doctor and Sarah were led into the crew quarters and bound hand and foot on the floor. So far, the two men seemed to have forgotten about Stevenson, who was busy locking the doors and windows of the outer huts. The doctor wondered how long it would be before he returned. Stevenson still had his rifle with him. If they could play for time, he became aware of Scorby's pistol again. "Right, Doctor. Let's have the truth. Where's the plant that came out of that pod? That grew in the bed that was part of the house that Jack built?" "I'm not a patient man," threatened Scorby. Suddenly, Keeler interrupted. "Shh! Hold it! Someone's coming. Must be the other guy." Scorby turned from the doctor and pointed his gun at the closed door. "Doctor? Miss Smith? Where are you?" came a voice from outside. The door opened and Stevenson entered. "Come and join the party." Scorby lowered his pistol to wave the visitor in. Stevenson reacted like lightning and fired his rifle point blank at Scorby's chest. There was a harmless click. Scorby chuckled. "Not very friendly." He grabbed Stevenson by the shoulders and hurled him across the room. "Get over there!" Stevenson fell with a crunch beside the others. "Good try," said the doctor. "What's happening?" "For some reason, these two want to get their hands on the pod." He looked meaningfully at Stevenson. "I've told them how dangerous." "The pod's still safe?" interrupted Stevenson, misunderstanding. "They haven't taken it out." Scorby's ears pricked up visibly and Stevenson realized his blunder. "Taken it out where?" Scorby turned to Keeler, a look of triumph on his face. "Know what that means?" Keeler grinned. "They've got a second pod." Stevenson shot the doctor an anguished look. Scorby crossed to them both. "Where is it?" "Don't be a bigger fool than you already are," said the doctor angrily. "Don't you understand? It's dangerous! Where is the pod?" The gun pointed menacingly at them, but the doctor and Stevenson remained mute. "Stubborn pair, aren't they?" said Scorby, controlling his venom. "All right." He put the pistol against Sarah's head. "I mean it this time," he whispered softly. Sarah felt her stomach turn over. She held her breath for what seemed like an eternity. The doctor's voice broke the silence. "It's in the freezer." "Thank you, Doctor." Scorby took out a second, smaller pistol, which he handed to Keeler. "Watch them. You," he prodded Stevenson. "Come with me." He bundled the unhappy scientist out of the room. Keeler trained the gun nervously on the doctor and Sarah. "Don't worry," beamed the doctor. "You're quite safe with us." Stevenson led Scorby to the lab and produced the second pod out of the freezer. Scorby cursed Keeler under his breath for missing it. "Are there any more?" "No, this is unique. Priceless, as you are no doubt aware." "What's to stop it breaking open like the other one?" "It's quite safe at this temperature," replied Stevenson calmly. "I see. Well, it's going on a little journey, so find me something to keep it cool." Stevenson hunted around the debris until he found a thermo container in which he placed the pod. As they returned to the crew quarters, Scorby asked about their source of electrical supply. Stevenson explained curtly about the power unit. When they rejoined the others, Stevenson was bound hand and foot like the doctor and Sarah. "You could say your goodbyes now," sneered Scorby and pointed his gun at the helpless captives. "You're not going to shoot us in cold blood," murmured Sarah. With a laugh, Scorby let his arm drop. "No, I've got a better idea." He grabbed hold of Sarah. "You're coming with us. Give me a hand, Keeler." Sarah's feet were untied and she was dragged toward the door. "How do you expect to get away from here?" yelled Stevenson. "You said your plane was grounded." Scorby smiled. "You shouldn't believe everything people tell you." With a bang, the door slammed shut. Sarah, her hands still tied, was led to an outer door. "Right," ordered Scorby. Take us to the power unit.
I don't know what you mean,
lied Sarah. Don't try to be clever. You checked it earlier. Now move. He shoved her forward into the snow. Keeler followed, carrying the precious container. The trio rounded the corner of the farthest hut and set off across the open waste. It was still snowing. The first few streaks of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. Sarah wondered briefly if she would live to see another day. Inside the crew quarters, the doctor had wriggled to his feet and was hopping up and down like a jack-in-a-box. Above his head hung an old hurricane lamp for use in emergencies. Stevenson observed the doctor's antics with puzzlement.
What are you doing?
Ever played football? Gasped the doctor as he headed the lamp off its hook and onto the floor. The glass smashed into fragments.
Quick! Stevenson inched over to the doctor, whose fingers had grabbed a piece of the broken glass.
Now keep very still, or I might cut a blood vessel. The doctor began to saw away at the rope around Stevenson's wrists. Outside in the cold dawn, the creature observed the lights of the camp from behind a hillock of snow. It was now 7 or 8 feet high. After a moment or two, it set off toward the camp, moving at an exceptional speed, its long fibrous tentacles dragging behind in the snow. It reached the nearest hut and began to edge slowly along the side, looking for a way in. The trek across the snowy waste seemed to Sarah like a march to the guillotine, an inexorable journey to certain death. Once inside the power unit, Scorby tied her to a heavy pipe on the wall and then started to fix an explosive device to the side of the fuel cell. This bomb will set off a fault in the system, which in turn will blow up the entire camp, leaving no clues whatsoever. Ingenious, don't you think?
You're twisted! Evil! Replied Sarah. Why kill us all? Why not just take the pod?
Scorby leered sadistically. You know too much. He finished wiring the charge and picked up the pod container. Come on, Keeler. Let's get airborne. Sarah suddenly noticed Keeler's strange, tortured expression. No, I can't let you do this! He lunged at Scorby. It's cold-blooded murder! Scorby brushed him aside. Too late, he snarled. I've already started the countdown. He turned to Sarah. You won't have long to wait. 10 minutes at the most. He strode out. Keeler shot Sarah a final, anguished look, then hurried after. The door slammed shut, and Sarah heard the bolt drawn across. She glanced at the detonator. The numerals on the clock were clearly visible. They read 580 seconds. She struggled to free her bonds, but knew it was hopeless. With the final wrench, the doctor released his wrist from the biting rope and headed for the door. I'll get after the pod. And Sarah, he snapped at Stevenson, you contact main base on the radio and see if they can intercept the aircraft. What about the crinoid? We'll have to take a chance on that, cried the doctor and dashed out. Stevenson hobbled after him into the corridor, rubbing his wrists and ankles. The doctor set out from the camp at a run, his eyes scanning the murky gray landscape. Sarah! Sarah! His voice died on the wind, although it was nearly daylight and snowfall was still heavy. He hesitated a moment, then headed in the direction of the landing strip. They had probably made straight for the plane. It was a slim chance, but he still might be able to stop them from taking off. In the lab, Stevenson was feverishly plugging up the radio. Hello, main base. Hello, main base. Can you hear me? Over. The line seemed dead. Hello, main base. Over. Nothing. Behind him, the door began to open slowly, and a fibrous tentacle pushed its way into the room. Hello, this is Camp 3 calling main base. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? He threw down the headphones and inspected the back of the equipment. Immediately, he saw the damage. Sabotage, he whispered to himself. Then suddenly, he realized he was not alone. He whirled around. A terrifying mass of green tentacles was bearing down on him. No! No! Stevenson stumbled back, crashing into the radio. There was no escape. The tentacles were all around him and closing in. He let out a last, desperate cry as the crinoid enveloped him totally. In the power unit, Sarah stared, mesmerized, as the seconds ticked away. The doctor pounded through the snow, his scarf flailing in the wind. What a fool he had been. The pod stolen by a thug with a gun. The consequences were incalculable. All at once, a fresh noise cut through the howl of the wind. The doctor stopped and strained his ears. It was a plane taking off. He was too late. The thought stabbed him like a knife. Sarah? He hardly dared contemplate her fate. He turned back toward the camp, a lonely and dejected figure. His gaze swept the glaring white snowscape, but took nothing in. Then, abruptly, he jerked to life again. Looming out of the snow a few hundred yards away was the dark shape of the power unit building. He set off toward it at full pelt. Not far away, but hidden by the ridge, another figure had moved quickly through the snow. But this figure was not human. Its purpose was deadly. Click, click, click. The dial showed less than a minute to go. Sarah felt the panic rise inside her as the ropes refused to give. Suddenly, she heard a scrabbling outside the door. Her heart missed a beat. Then it was flung open, and the doctor burst in. With one bound, he was by her side and untying the ropes. "Doctor! The whole camp is going to be blown sky high any second!" Expertly, the doctor unraveled Sarah's knots and took in the bomb with a hurried glance. There was no time to defuse it. Sarah pulled one arm free. "Where's Stevenson?" "I'll have to try and save him." The doctor released her other arm and hauled Sarah to her feet. "Come on!" Sarah took one pace and froze. "Doctor, look!" She pointed to the door. The doctor spun around. Blocking the doorway was the monstrous bulk of the crinoid. From its body sprouted 100 tentacles, each as thick as a man's arm. Where once a face had existed, there was now a gnarled and twisted mass of bark. It remained in the doorway, swaying from side to side and emitting a low, unearthly rattle. "Get behind me," whispered the doctor. Sarah did so. She could hear the bomb ticking quite clearly. The crinoid started to advance. The doctor edged around the wall. Suddenly, the creature rushed toward them. The doctor sidestepped, pulling Sarah with him, and one of the green tentacles caught on the metal grid protecting the fuel cell. There was a flash, and the crinoid roared in pain. "Run!" yelled the doctor, and bundled Sarah toward the door. As she passed the creature, Sarah felt a cold, slimy tentacle brush her face. She let out a scream, and the next thing she knew, she was pitched into the wet snow. Behind her, the doctor slammed the door and slid the bolt into position. "Get away!" he shouted, and raced off in the direction of the camp. With horror, Sarah realized he still hoped to rescue Stevenson. "Doctor, there isn't time!" she cried, but the doctor was already out of earshot. Sarah glanced again at the power unit. It was about to explode. She sprinted for cover of the ridge. Inside, the crinoid pounded the door in a frenzy. 8, 7, 6. It managed to prise one tentacle through. 5, 4. Sarah could see the ridge. Only a few yards further. 3, 2. The doctor came in sight of the camp. He opened his mouth to yell, "Stevens!" There was a searing flash of red. The ground shook. A firework seemed to explode in his head. Then he was sinking into a white cloud of nothingness. Chapter 5. Betrayal. Sarah woke. She found herself staring up at a clear blue sky. She tried to sit up, but there was no sensation in her arms or legs. For one awful moment, she wondered if she had lost them. Then she realized they were numb with cold. Suddenly, a foot crunched in the snow a few inches from her head. A muffled figure in furs and goggles loomed over her. "I almost missed you in the snow," it said in a familiar English accent. Sarah smiled weakly. "Yes, well, there's rather a lot of it about." "Are you all right?" "I think so." The man helped her to her feet. "We're from South Bend, medical team. We heard the explosion. What happened?" "The explosion!" It came back with a rush. The doctor! Where was he? She began to run toward the camp like a mad thing. More figures jumped from a snowcat in pursuit. Panting, Sarah reached the top of the ridge, only to let out a gasp of horror. Where once the camp had stood, there was now only a heap of blackened ash and twisted metal. A few wisps of smoke curled up into the blue sky. She looked back at the power unit. That too had completely disappeared. Stunned, Sarah lowered her gaze. As she did so, she gave a cry of fear. Sticking out from the snow a few feet away was a hand. "Doctor!" she screamed, and began to claw frantically at the snow. Moments later, strong arms arrived and pulled the inert figure of the doctor from the snow. Desperately, Sarah slapped his face to try and revive him. "Doctor, wake up! Wake up!"
For a while, nothing happened. Then slowly, one eye opened and winked. The grin she knew so well spread across the doctor's face, and he spoke. "Good morning." Sarah breathed a sigh of relief and smiled back. She was never more grateful in her life to hear those two simple words. Harrison Chase sat in his library, glowing with triumph. On the desk in front of him stood the thermo container. "Well, open it! Open it!" he ordered. Keeler removed the lid to reveal the pod. Chase stared at it with greedy fascination. "I must hold it," he whispered, and lovingly lifted out the strange green object. "It's all right in its present state," advised Keeler, "but we must be careful." "Why?" "The other pod infected one of their men." Chase abruptly replaced the pod. "Infected? What happened?" Keeler explained. "Incredible," said Chase. "You're sure the other one was destroyed?" "The whole scientific base, and everyone in it, was obliterated," said Scorby smugly. "Excellent. Regrettable, but excellent." Chase gazed at the pod once more. "Think of it, gentlemen," he said. "If the theory is correct, this has come to us across thousands of years and millions of miles." "The last few miles caused a bit of trouble," muttered Scorby. "Trouble?" scoffed Chase. "Nothing would be too much trouble for this." The intercom buzzed on his desk. "Yes, Hargreaves?" "Mr. Dunbar of Webb is here to see you, sir." "Send him in." Chase clicked off the receiver. A moment later, a distraught-looking Dunbar was ushered in. He hesitated at the sight of Keeler and Scorby. "It's all right," explained Chase smoothly. "These are the two men who brought back the pod." Dunbar spoke with suppressed fury. "I had no idea you would go to such terrible lengths to get it." "The destruction of the others was necessary." Chase spoke without emotion. "Necessary!" repeated Dunbar, appalled. "You've been handsomely rewarded for your part, Dunbar, so put on a stiff upper lip and forget your qualms. The object has been achieved." Chase gestured toward the pod. "We can all relax." Dunbar took a pace forward. "Not quite." Chase stiffened. "What do you mean?" "They weren't all wiped out. That's what I came to warn you about. The doctor and his assistant are still alive." "Impossible!" hissed Chase. "The doctor is meeting us at Webb in an hour's time." Dunbar waited for the effect of his news. Keeler and Scorby shifted uneasily on the spot. Chase turned to face them, his eyes blazing. "You asinine bunglers!" "You were very lucky, Doctor." The speaker was Sir Colin Thackeray, director of the World Ecology Bureau, a large, distinguished-looking man with a rather precise manner. "Simple presence of mind," replied the doctor dismissively. "Are you quite certain it was sabotage?" Dunbar spoke now. "That explosion was no accident," said Sarah Jane firmly. She had recovered from the ordeal, but appeared tired after the trip back to England. Sir Colin looked puzzled. "Why on earth should anyone want to possess a thing like that so badly?" "Greed, the most dangerous impulse in the galaxy," exclaimed the doctor, jumping to his feet and addressing them all. "You realize that on this planet the pod is unique. I use that word with precision, and to some people its uniqueness makes it desirable at any cost." "You make these men sound like fanatics," said Dunbar derisively. The doctor sauntered over to the side of the room and peered at a model of the Antarctic base. "No," he said slowly. "I think they were working for someone else." "The real fanatic," added Sarah. "What's more to the point is how they got onto it." The doctor spun around to face Dunbar. "The expedition had only reported its discovery to this office, right?" Dunbar colored. "Doctor, I trust you aren't suggesting information was leaked from this bureau." "Yes. What would be the gain from it?" intervened Sir Colin. "Money," replied the doctor sharply. "Thieves and murderers don't usually work for love." "Since you seem to have this business sewn up, Doctor, where do you think the pod is now?" Dunbar sounded aggressive. "I'd make a guess and say, right in this country." The doctor crossed to Sir Colin and jabbed him in the chest. "Action, Sir Colin, that's what is needed. If we don't find that pod before it germinates, it will be the end of everything, even your pension." The last thought seemed to galvanize Sir Colin into activity. "Of course, Doctor. We'll do all we can to help. The entire facilities of this bureau are at your disposal." He glared at his deputy. "All right, Dunbar?" Dunbar nodded. "I'll organize anything you require." "Good," snapped the doctor. "Then organize us to this botanical institute."
A few minutes later, the unmistakable figures of the doctor and his assistant emerged from the entrance of the World Ecology Bureau. A uniformed chauffeur approached them. "Doctor?" "Yes." "This car was ordered for you, sir." He indicated a large black limousine. "How kind. After you, Sarah." They climbed in. The doctor gave instructions to the chauffeur, and the car moved off. Alone in his office, Dunbar dialed a number. Someone answered the other end. Dunbar leaned closer into the phone and whispered, "It's all right. They're being taken care of." "Excellent," replied the voice, and hung up. Dunbar replaced the receiver thoughtfully. The limousine was approaching the outskirts of London. The doctor had remained pensive and silent throughout the journey, and Sarah had chosen not to disturb him. She looked out of the window as the car turned down a side road and into open country. The Botanical Institute was farther out of town than she thought. Suddenly, the car lurched to a halt. The road had become little more than a dirt track, leading to what seemed like a disused quarry. The doctor jerked to life. "What's going on?" The chauffeur turned around, a revolver in his hand. "We're in a nice deserted place, doctor. Now, both of you, out!" He slipped from behind the wheel and, keeping them covered, opened the rear passenger door. The doctor winked. "I think we'd better do as he says, Sarah." He started to get out slowly. Then, in one explosive action, he swung the door violently at the chauffeur, knocking him flying into the mud, and dragged Sarah from the car. "Run!" he yelled, and the two of them sprinted away down the rutted track. Winded, the chauffeur groped for his revolver, but before he could take aim, the two figures disappeared down a gully. He staggered to his feet and set off in pursuit. One quick glance was sufficient for the doctor to take in the quarry. A large sandhopper with a raised platform lay to the right. He changed direction toward it, shouting instructions to Sarah as he did so. A few moments later, the panting gunman arrived beneath the hopper. His captives had vanished into thin air. To his left was an old pile of gravel, enough for a hiding place. He crept toward it, finger on the trigger. "I need a drink of water before I die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die." To his left was an old pile of gravel, enough for a hiding place. He crept toward it, finger on the trigger. Suddenly, there was a noise behind him. He spun around and fired. 20 feet above his head, the doctor crouched on the hopper platform, poised to leap. He could see Sarah plainly behind the gravel pile. She picked up a second pebble and threw it in the air. The chauffeur turned and fired again, then took a pace forward, bringing him directly below the doctor. The doctor eyed the drop one more time, noted the position of the revolver, and launched himself into space. Thud! Ow. The chauffeur crumpled like a rag doll as the doctor's 217 pounds slammed into him. Sarah dashed out from behind the mound. The doctor picked himself up and was about to administer a straight left when he realized his dive had laid the gunman out cold. "He isn't dead," said Sarah fearfully. "Unconscious. It seems news travels fast from the South Pole." The doctor gathered up the revolver and hurled it out of sight. "Let's search the car." They ran back. Clearly, the limousine did not belong to the World Ecology Bureau. But who did own it? There appeared to be no clues inside the car. Sarah suddenly called the doctor to the trunk. She was holding up a framed painting of a flower. In the corner was a signature. "Emilia Ducat," read the doctor, puzzled. "An original as well," exclaimed Sarah excitedly. "Must be worth something." "You think so?" Sarah eyed the doctor with disdain. "Doctor, you mean to say you haven't heard of Emilia Ducat? She's one of the country's leading flower artists." The doctor glanced in the direction of the sandhopper. "Hardly a passion for a gunman," he said with a grin. "Still, let's see if Miss Ducat can throw any light on the subject." He leapt into the driving seat and, scarcely allowing Sarah time to climb in, accelerated off toward the main road. "Ah, yes. Perfect example of Fritillaria meleagris." The speaker was an eccentric little lady in her 60s, dressed in heavy tweeds. A pair of gold-rimmed spectacles dangled on a chain around her neck, and a large cigar jutted from the side of her mouth. She held the painting at arm's length admiringly. "Rather good, don't you think?" The doctor smiled indulgently. "We're trying to trace the owner, Miss Ducat." "You mean it isn't yours?" "No, we found it in a car truck." Why did they write truck? It says truck right there. It says truck, I swear. No. We found it in a car trunk. In a car trunk? Miss Ducat looked horrified. How insensitive. So was the driver, chipped in Sarah. He tried to kill us. Good gracious, whatever for? The doctor leaned over the top of Miss Ducat's easel, which held a half-completed painting. Miss Ducat, he said, in his friendliness and most coaxing tone, do you remember who bought this painting? Miss Ducat stared, a little puzzled, at the painting in front of her. Nobody. It isn't finished yet. No, this one, Miss Ducat, explained Sarah. Fritillaria Milliwhatsit. Ah, oh, let me see now. Miss Ducat took a couple of good puffs on her cigar and coughed violently. It was 6 or 7 years ago. She closed her eyes in deep concentration. Lace? Mace? Pace? Race? Miss Ducat struggled manfully. Brace? Said Sarah. Grace? Tried the doctor. Chase! Shouted Miss Ducat triumphantly. Harrison Chase, the millionaire! A strange look came over her. Good Lord, she said. He never paid me. Sarah glanced at the doctor, who suppressed a smile. Give me his address, Miss Ducat, he said, and I'll see what I can do. 20 minutes later, the large black limousine was cruising effortlessly through the country. That's not how you spell cruising. 20 minutes later, the large black limousine was cruising effortlessly through the countryside, the doctor at the wheel. He was dressed in the chauffeur's dark blue raincoat. I hope this works, said Sarah doubtfully. A risk worth taking, replied the doctor seriously. We must find that pod. The road now ran alongside the high wall of an estate, topped with barbed wire, and signs at intervals marked, Danger! Keep out! The doctor spotted the gateway ahead and pulled the car into the verge. Ready? He smiled encouragingly at Sarah. She ducked down beneath the windshield out of sight. The doctor doffed the chauffeur's peaked cap, glanced appreciatively at himself in the mirror, and eased the car forward. The heavy wooden gates were at least 20 feet high and studded with metal bolts like a prison entrance. From the look of things, Mr. Harrison Chase was a gentleman who valued his privacy. He was also a gentleman with friends in high places. On past evidence, their little contretemps with the chauffeur could soon be reported, and before then the doctor knew he had to somehow penetrate Chase's domain and retrieve the pod. He swung the car in front of the gates and beeped the horn. A uniformed guard poked his head through a small door set in the right-hand gate. He glanced at the car, nodded, then disappeared inside. Seconds later, the gates parted, and the doctor accelerated through. The guard stood back as the car swept past, hardly giving it a look, then shut the gates again. The doctor breathed a sigh of relief. He had banked correctly on this being a routine procedure. They were now in the grounds of a large and imposing manor house, glimpses of which the doctor caught through thick greenery bordering the approach road. He slowed down, searching for a fork which would lead around to the back of the property. Sure enough, there was one. He steered the big car expertly down a narrow drive and pulled to a halt beneath a clump of trees. So far, so good, he whispered, and tapped Sarah on the shoulder. She straightened up from her hiding position. Ouch! I'm sure there are more comfortable ways of traveling. She rubbed her back painfully. We'll leave the car here, said the doctor, ignoring her complaint. He switched off the ignition and slid gently out of the car. Sarah did likewise. The nearest place of cover was a crumbling wall with a series of elegant arches set into it. The doctor moved silently toward the wall, Sarah in tow. From there they could see the house clearly across a wild expanse of overgrown lawn. It was a magnificent Elizabethan manor house, large and rambling, with several courtyards and outbuildings running off of it. The gardens immediately surrounding the house were a blaze of color, a breathtaking profusion of flowers of every kind, but further from the house the vegetation grew thicker and more exotic, forming a jungle-like screen around the whole property. Lovely house, whispered Sarah. What's the best way in? Not the front door, I'm afraid. At that moment, 2 uniformed guards appeared. They were no more than 50 yards away. Over their shoulders they carried vicious-looking stun guns. It was obvious their course would bring them straight to where the doctor and Sarah were hiding. We'll have to bluff it, whispered the doctor, and stepped nonchalantly out into the open. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she followed suit. Any second she expected to be enveloped in a hail of bullets. At the same time, she found herself laughing inwardly at the comical nature of the doctor and the chauffeur's hat and coat, attempting to walk quickly yet casually away from the guards. They were halfway toward the house when a voice rang out behind them. "Hey, you!" The doctor quickened his pace. "Halt!" The sound of a safety catch being released was clearly audible. "Run!" yelled the doctor as he sprinted toward a narrow gate at the side of the house. "I said halt!" The doctor burst open the gate with his shoulder and pushed Sarah through. As he did so, a shower of bullets slammed into the masonry inches above his head, and alarm bells began to ring inside the house. They were now running along a narrow terrace. Suddenly, more guards appeared at the far end. The doctor grabbed Sarah's arm and leapt with her off the terrace onto the ground and headed on a zigzag course toward the surrounding cover of trees. The barking of tracker dogs could be heard above the din of bells and machine gun fire. One thing is certain, thought the doctor. Harrison Chase doesn't take kindly to strangers. Seconds later, they reached the belt of trees and plunged in. Branches, thorns, and razor-sharp leaves cut their skin and clawed at their clothing as they crashed through the jungle-like vegetation. "This way, Sarah," gasped the doctor, and struck out to his left. The hue and cry was falling behind them and to their right. Any plan to penetrate the house was now useless, but if they could make the outer wall, thought the doctor, they might still escape. Ahead of them appeared a solid mass of giant bamboo. Sarah felt she was acting out a nightmare. This couldn't be happening in England. The doctor beat a way through. "Come on, nearly there." Sarah willed herself on. Suddenly, she literally fell into a clearing. Ahead was a small pathway. The doctor saw her fall and ran back. "Quick!" He hauled her to her feet and dragged her forward again. The blood was pounding through her veins, and her lungs were bursting for air. Then, all at once, Sarah felt the doctor's grip slacken. He had stopped. "Hello, doctor. I heard you were on your way." Sarah froze as the unmistakable voice of Scorby cut through the air. Gun in hand, his familiar dark figure blocked the pathway ahead. At the same moment, 3 armed guards appeared from nowhere and seized them both. Scorby stepped up to them, savoring the moment. "You weren't thinking of leaving, I hope. Mr. Chase is so looking forward to meeting you." Chapter 6, A Visit to Harrison Chase. And to be continued. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, please drop a like and comment Doctor Who down below. Thank you so much. Bye.